I'd like to sort of hear your thoughts on what we got out of Kamala last night. She talked a little bit about tariffs. There was this one moment which I actually thought was perhaps rather telling in her lack of fluency, shall I say, with the economy and economic policy issues. She kept talking about how she was going to somehow manage to get housing prices under control holistically, shall we say. Here, let's take a listen.
And assistance to state and local governments around transit dollars, and looking holistically at the connection between that and housing, and looking holistically at the incentives we in the federal government can create for local and state governments to actually engage in planning in a holistic manner that includes prioritizing affordable housing.
What's your view on that, Rob? I mean, can we prioritize affordable housing to the tune of $25,000 for each and every first-time home buyer and still keep housing costs under control?
No, I don't think so. I don't think providing subsidies to new home buyers is going to bring down home prices. That's sort of obvious. Look, I think, I don't quite know what she was saying there. The word holistic, I kind of like that word actually when it's properly, applied. And I actually think Donald Trump is a pretty good holistic thinker who looks at things from different angles, in like, if we're really going to use the word correctly. But I mean, I think she's just sort of throwing it out there as sort of like, to confuse the situation and to sort of justify whatever actual policies she's actually thinking about when it comes to housing or, siphoning money off to the local transit authorities. So it's a dodge, and it's a word that they use in academia. I've noticed quite a bit to kind of make it sound like sophistication, but it's really just losing the audience in abstraction.
She talked a little bit about tariffs. Somehow Donald Trump is the bad one because he enacted all these tariffs. But the reporter points out to her in this next clip I'm going to show, and I would like your reaction to that, you know what? We still have those tariffs, right? On a lot of those goods from China. You never got rid of them. I'm curious your thoughts on what she says, but then we should have a broader conversation on tariffs in general, because the traditional school of thought when it comes to tariffs is that they're not good, that they're very hurtful. But there's, I think, a lot of economic thinkers, increasingly so now, that would just say, you know what, it's actually not as inflationary as you think. But let's first watch Kamala.
Tariffs aren't unique to President Trump. President Biden has tariffs in place. He's actually looking to potentially implement more. Where do you come out on? Is there a good tariff, a bad tariff?
Well, part of it is you don't just throw around the idea of just tariffs across the board, and that's part of the problem with Donald Trump. Frankly, and I say this in all sincerity, he's just not very serious about how he thinks about some of these issues. And one must be serious and have a plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is pretty serious in that he does have a plan. And in fact, his plan was so serious that she still has his plan. Right? Let me just ask you more broadly, though, about tariffs in general, because, again, the school of thought has been, you can go back to Smoot-Hawley and talk about how, maybe that's what actually helped to agitate and lead us towards World War II, because we were all sort of against each other because of all these tariffs in trade. But in actuality, nowadays, they're saying it may not be as bad as you think.
Yeah, and at least now we're actually, she's opening herself up to potentially having an economic policy discussion at all. So I think it's, that's progress, right? So, but it's interesting. Tariffs are a topic that I think people really need to, have more serious discussions around. And Trump has some very interesting ideas. So, look, I come from a background where I too favor kind of free trade and free markets. That's sort of my initial instinct. And I think that's sort of been conservative, kind of traditional conservative thinking for many decades. Yeah. But like, let's take a step back and really think about what is a tariff. It's basically a sales tax that's applied to imported goods, right? That the foreign importer, exporter has to pay to access our markets. So it is inflationary in the sense that any and all taxes applied across the economy are inflationary. If you tax something, whether it's corporate profits or whether it's capital gains or earned income, you're imposing a cost on the economy, but we do need to collect revenues. And I think what Trump is proposing here is another method of collecting revenues, but doing it in a way that favors some of the political and industrial goals of the United States. And what I would just to build on that, no one talks about how raising corporate income taxes would also be inflationary, but it would be. There's plenty of academic research. I read one study by University of Chicago and Northwestern professors saying that corporate income tax hikes actually are 50% passed through to the customers. And there's very strong economic logic supporting that.
So that kind of pokes a hole in her theory that, everybody just needs to pay their fair share. That somehow, people just aren't. And in fact, that's a lot of what we heard last night. I'm going to go back to that for just a moment, because here she is saying, I can just raise corporate taxes. I don't care whether I got Congress along for the ride or not. She's got some interesting theories on this. I guess it's to be expected, given how this administration thinks they can defy the Supreme Court on college loans. But here we go.
Expanding that child tax credit, or you mentioned housing before, giving that extra money for a first home. If you can't raise corporate taxes, or if GOP takes control of the Senate, where do you get the money to do that? Do you still go forward with those plans and borrow?
Well, but we're going to have to raise corporate taxes, and we're going to have to make sure that the biggest corporations and billionaires pay their fair share. That's just it. It's about paying their fair share. I am not mad at anyone for achieving success, but everyone should pay their fair share, and it is not right that the teachers...
She continues to go on and on about that, bringing back Rob into the conversation. Your thoughts? If you actually look at the data, I think what you'd find is that the wealthy are actually paying the bulk of taxes. But let's go back to corporate taxes for just a moment, because the reporter actually allowed her to kind of get away with that one. That was kind of a strange response in my estimation. She looked a little bit out over her skis. I don't know if she knew how to answer a question like that. So she just went back to a talking point, which was, let them all pay their fair share, and in hopes of maybe striking some kind of emotional chord. And I don't think she answered the question, something that, by the way, the reporter even admitted later.
Yeah, I guess she pivoted away from actually addressing the question of corporate income taxes and into sort of more kind of like taxes on the wealthy. But like when you talk about fair share, again, it's like the word holistic. What is the fair share? What's the right level at which to pitch corporate income tax rates? If you look at like how we generate revenue in the United States, corporate income taxes actually aren't a huge source of revenue. So whether they go up or down a few percentage points, it actually won't make you're not going to solve the long-term budget, deficit problems and our major, kind of debt problems by slightly increasing corporate income tax rates or even, going after billionaires. That's not going to be the solution. There's actually not enough money there that's not that's not the problem. That's not the core problem. And the problem is when you start raising corporate income tax rates, there's a lot of negative consequences to that. As we just mentioned, it is inflationary. They'll pass through those higher those higher costs onto consumers. So it's inflationary. Some corporations could figure out ways to re-domicile in other countries. And in general, it discourages investment. It discourages expansion of business because you're not keeping the rewards of your investments. So this is why we don't have onerous corporate tax rates, why we try to keep them, at
I don't know. I was just over in Ireland. I'm kind of liking the 12% over there with corporate tax rates. And I realize, I mean, Janet Yellen earlier this year was out trying to say that somehow we're going to legislate the world, right? We're going to say, no, you can't have those kind of lower tax rates. And it's like, whoa, Janet, like, is the US, I mean, you want to talk, I know we're the hegemonic power in the world. I know we're the biggest deal, but wow, you want to talk about throwing your weight around. You're now going to dictate tax policy for the rest of the entire world. That was pretty aggressive to me. And look, I mean, there are reasons why people choose to have lower taxes. But again, like, you know, the US, it's up there. It's not like we can say we are one of the lowest. We're actually on the higher end, Rob.
No, that's true. I mean, we don't have particularly low corporate tax rates, and it probably would be net helpful to the economy to bring them down. And I think Trump, favors that. So,
he keeps talking about it. He definitely wants to do that.